I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zives Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everyone.
Hello, and welcome to Arcane Mark. Today we're going to be talking about success and failure in tabletop RPG systems.
That's right. Almost all, though not all, tabletop RPG systems have some sort of resolution mechanic that is used to determine whether an action or attempt is going to be successful or not. Now, might not just be a binary yes or no. There are a few systems that are exceptions that prove the rule where you just kind of, like the timeline RPG, where you just kind of put things on timelines and do sort of extemporaneous little scenes and organize things, but they are outliers. Mm-hmm. Almost every tabletop RPG has some resolution mechanic. Now, the secret of these mechanics is that they might seem like a whole lot of math and technicality to a game that has a lot of imagination and make-believe that is all found in the lore of the game. But in reality, the success and failure resolution mechanic have a deep and profound impact on the feel, themes, and even the sort of partially the genre of the game in ways that are sometimes overt, but sometimes sort of subtle and hidden.
Yeah. So one thing that you might consider for that is how much harder is it to succeed at something that your character, is said to be not particularly good at versus something that they are said to be very good at. Is it a system that really focuses on, there are some characters and some creatures who are amazing and complete standouts of this particular ability, and there are some characters or creatures who just can't do it at all, or who really struggle to do it.
That's right. So what you're looking for in a resolution mechanic is, well, obviously you want to know what sort of possible states are there. Is it just success versus failure? Is that it? Or are there more than that? For example, in a lot of systems that involve, say, rolling a d20, there might only be a success or failure, or there might sometimes be a critical success, possibly for rolling a natural 20, or one of various other ways. Pathfinder 2 is going to be that you succeed by 10 or more, or that you succeed while rolling a natural 20 is a critical success. Some systems have fumbles or critical failures, such as Pathfinder would be that you fail by 10 or more, or you fail while rolling a natural 1 to get a critical failure, for example. And there are also systems where they add a little bit more drama by having failure, total failure, versus a success, which is always partial or is a yes, but, and then the critical success condition is the only total success. That's a yes, no buts. You got everything you wanted, and no complications.
And that might further break down into something, like minimal success or succeed but not for long versus total success.
That's right.
That then introduces that then has a very different impact on the story, because there's a big difference. Minimal success is like, okay, you did a thing that gestured in that direction. Succeed for not for long, the player knows, hey, I need to be thinking about what I'm going to do next when this goes south.
Some systems have an even more robust number of successes and failures possible, and almost infinite ones. For instance, classic storyteller RPG from like Vampire and those games, not the 5th edition, but the classic version, you would wind up rolling a number of d10s and then add up the number of successes you have on that, with a natural 1 turning into a negative 1 instead of 0, and a 10 sometimes counting for 2 depending on the situation. And then if you got literally negative, that was a botch. That was like a critical failure. 0 means a total failure. Then you would go up in the 20th anniversary edition, for example. 1 is like the bare minimum of success, but it's really not very good. You technically did the thing, but it would be equivalent to like just for a history project copying the Wikipedia article or asking an AI to generate it.
So you did it, but
you didn't really do anything good. Whereas 2 successes in that one is like you succeed but not for long, or something else is going to come up right away. 3 is the actual total successes. You need 3 successes for it. 4 is like great, it's even better than that. And then 5 is legendary, and it gets more and more from that. So you can have game systems that have a theoretical unbounded number of success states. That one did, because you could roll 30 successes. What does that even mean when 5 is legendary? The GM kind of has to figure that one out. Another really important factor for your game success and failure system isn't just whether you can critically succeed or whether how many different degrees of success, but what the probabilities are.
Yes.
And how they can shift. Here's an example. First, I want to call out something very important for your success and failure system that's tied to this. There's a big difference between whether your system allows you to attempt something that has a 0% chance of success or does not allow you to attempt it at all or roll for it at all.
So what are some of the differences?
Well, let me give an example that is often used by people who want to use an ad absurdum argument to try to analyze tabletop RPG resolution mechanics, which is, I will use the game's jump mechanics, whether it's an athletics check or a jump check or whatever, to jump to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, in Pathfinder 2nd edition, because the distance to jump to the moon is more than 30 higher than your modifier for jumping, I guarantee it, unless you were like a few feet away from the moon or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can roll. If you say I'm going to jump to the moon, you can roll, and no matter what you do, even on a natural 20, you will fail.
But
you
your character then
fail
still jumps
95% of the time. You will fail 5% of the time, but you attempt the jump.
Mm-hmm.
In many other systems where that is not possible, instead, it's up to the GM to say, you cannot try that. It is the moon.
Mm-hmm.
There is a difference between they try it and it had a 0% chance of success and the GM just saying, no, you can't. So when you look at where the line is for your RPG, where the answer could be 0, like in Pathfinder 2, for what is the lowest chance of success that this RPG will actually allow you to have when you're allowed to roll. In a lot of cases, it actually is 0, or let's say it's the 20-sided die, 5%.
5%. If it's like, okay, yeah,
It's
you
like,
have to
okay.
at least, we're not going to even let you roll if you can't succeed on a 20.
Sometimes in D-percentage systems, the answer is 1%.
Yes.
Where you can get it on only a 100. Stephen Glicker at Roll for Combat tells a lot of stories of someone who was falling down a volcano. It's like, I should be able to find a ledge or something. And they're like, okay, roll D100 on 100, you will. And they did. Right? So in resolution systems, that can be the answer. But let's take a look at Forged in the Dark. Or even Blaze in the Dark, the original for Forged in the Dark. A gritty, dark world where consequences matter and characters eventually get so stressed out they have to retire, but also one that explicitly states in the game's sort of intro that it actually is pretty heroic despite being gritty, and it points to its resolution mechanic as being that way, and it's true. Because if you have any training at all, anything in the requisite type of action or move that you're rolling, you have at least a 50% chance of getting that regular partial success. And even if you have nothing, the worst you could possibly be, you have a 25% chance. So either the GM tells you no, or you have at least a 25% chance. That's pretty different than playing in a game where you could sometimes have a 5% chance.
I want to wind back a little bit because I don't think I quite got your point on the difference between a 0% chance at not being able to roll. Are you considering from the perspective of if you roll and there's a 0% chance of success, then there could be calamities that happen as a part of trying?
You're allowed to attempt it, but there was actually a 0% chance, whether you knew that or not at the time. You're allowed to try to open that vault that is so hard to open that you can't. That's like the vault made by the archdevils, and it can't be opened by mortal tools, and you're like, I'm going to try anyway. Whereas in others, like, for example, in a system that did not actually allow you to have a roll that you can't succeed, the GM will either have to say, no, mortal tools cannot pick this. Or, like, say they were doing Forged in the Dark, you would say, well, it's a very high-level thing, so because your tools were, like, 5 degrees worse than this, it even says that on a success you didn't do it all the way. But however, the player could somehow keep stacking success after success after success after success. They'd be like, okay, well, it was only partial. I'll take another move to unlock it some more. And they could keep rolling sixes and eventually unlock it. Like, you cannot actually stop someone in many RPG systems. Not Pathfinder 2, but many. Even Pathfinder 1, where a natural 20 was a automatic success. You couldn't technically stop someone from succeeding at a check without saying that they cannot roll it in certain circumstances. So the difference between whether an RPG system can actually get you a 0% chance or whether you have to fiat it is basically in whether you rolled and possibly had consequences for your failure.
Yeah, Rohit was saying, for me, it's more about what makes sense in the fiction or not. If it's something that doesn't make sense in fiction, then there should be no roll. Yeah, I mostly agree with that. Yeah, I mostly agree with that perspective as long as, like, it's not something where merely trying has a consequence. Like, for example, you could try to pick the Archdevil's Vault, but I'm only bothering to roll because we'll see if you set off the trap.
Right. Exactly. And to be clear, like, if someone was gonna try to pick the Archdevil's Vault, I would, as the GM, be like guys, you have mortal tools. You know this is the Archdevil's Vault, right? You really, it's probably not going to succeed. And the player might be like, I think it's a 0% chance of success. But my character's going to try anyway so they can say they tried.
Yeah.
And in many game systems, you would either have to just kind of hand wave and say, okay, you tried, we're not going to roll at all. It just didn't work. Or you'd have to let them have some chance of success in it. Yeah,
but I want to make sure that, they, like you were saying, that it was clear to the players, unless it was like, oh yeah, they critically fail to recall knowledge and they don't that's why they don't realize that this vault is actually a really good vault. But you want to make sure that it's fair, yeah. And I see Roat's also talking about, like, allowing a recall knowledge on a DC 40 check, even if the person is untrained, because they don't know, like, exactly how hard it is to know about that particular thing.
That's right. If they say, I want to find out about this creature or this mystery, and they don't know that it's a DC 40, why would you not allow it? And the question is only, did they get the wrong information, like legends and rumors that weren't correct and had inaccurate information, or nothing? Yeah. So it is actually relevant. Now, obviously, if you had a system that did not have critical failures and did not have consequences on failures, the failure was just a no, then there's no point. Another thing that we were going to get into after this, which is, like, what happens on your failures. We talked about successes that have a yes, but do your failures have a no and? If they don't, and there's no critical failure, and you can't succeed, then there's no point in rolling because nothing happens in your game. Yeah. But most games don't do that. In fact, D&D, and to an extent Pathfinder, especially Pathfinder 1st Edition, which is more similar to D&D in its success-failure mechanics, one of the few RPGs out there that has a lot of checks that are like, failure means nothing advanced, you have to try again. Yeah. Another one that you'll sometimes see is that failure means yes, but large consequence, as long as it's, an early stage failure, where you might have a system where it's like, the first time that you fail this, you're able to kind of move on to the next stage, but there's something that's going to make things harder. But then as your character gets more and more worn down, the consequences of failure become more severe. That's right. So when you take a look at all of that, you can see that the probabilities and whether or not something is allowed by the success-failure mechanic, plus what happens on the failure, drastically change the tone of your game. Here's another example of that. So, I said Pathfinder 2 has critical failures, but it does not have them as a special effect on every check. That means that if you roll a 1 on your tech roll, you critically failed. You did. But there's no different effect on a critical failure for the attack roll than on a regular failure. Now, certain reactions trigger off of a critical failure. That's true. But the problem with some systems that make large numbers of attacks and have a rule that you can critically fail and that causes you to, like, drop your weapon or trip on your feet is that you become basically tonally a clown. It becomes a little bit of a comedy because
how many times will the fighter get to swing their sword before they inevitably drop it again?
If your fighter swings your weapon, even if you're not talking about failing by 10, if you're talking about only a natural 1, if your fighter swings your weapon 3 times per round for 4 rounds per fight, they're going to drop their sword in about half of all fights or trip on their feet.
And in a similar vein, there was a comment that actually has scrolled off a little bit here about a game system where every time the characters get out of bed, every fumble has a chance to cause earthquakes, kaiju attacks, etc. So it made 0 sense for anyone in that world to leave their bed each day. Yeah, if the chance... I consider that to be related to the fighter dropping their sword in the way that, like, if the system is too punitive that it actually, like, warps the world to say, why is anyone even trying this? Like, if the chance of death when the PCs try this particular thing is, like, how did any adventurer even survive to level 2?
Sometimes the answer is that that's the game system's point, and the only thing you can do is something that has a good chance of killing you. For instance, in Dread, the resolution mechanic is not a die roll. It is drawing from a Jenga tower. And if you do it to whatever degree you need to, which might require multiple draws if the GM thinks it's hard, or you might have to go back and forth if you're going against another player, you do the thing that you want, and if it falls, you just die. Right? Like, so it's to your general advantage to not try to do a lot of things that require you to pull, because it's not going to be good that you pulled, other than if you needed to get done the thing that you wanted to get done. But that's sort of the tension. That's the anxiety that rises within you. You become anxious to attempt something, and it's a horror game where trying things have negative consequences. So it's all intentional in that resolution mechanic. Whereas if you're not running a horror game that isn't supposed to be like, this is oppressive, everything's bad, why am I even waking up? But is like, this is a heroic fantasy, and yes, kaiju will come with a 5% chance anytime I do anything, a kaiju attacks and kills my family. It would be like, and it wasn't supposed to be grimdark horror, like, but you've added grimdark horror because of your mechanic, and that is something that designers usually, skilled designers usually intentionally instill in their RPG, but sometimes, especially for newer folk who are making their own system or who are, like, modding another system and just starting out, they may accidentally unleash sort of genres that they were not looking to do so. For instance, if that was a heroic fantasy game where the kaiju fumble is common. I don't know which one specifically they were talking about there. And
there's a mention of fumble crit tables getting added to House Wars a lot by people who don't understand the effect they'll have on the game.
100%.
Yeah, especially depending on like how extreme are the results in those tables. If there's things like the one that I saw a little bit farther above where rolling a natural 1 on a perception check nearly killed a character. Like, that's...
It's better than rolling a natural 1 on a perception check nearly killing a player, I guess.
That is true. Break through the fourth wall, give you your deadly paper cut. But, yeah, so you can definitely have these kinds of situations where the consequences on those tables are out of step with what the consequences should generally be in the game. And I see another question in there about, can you talk about cases where players can repeatedly try a task without consequences? I would say if there's no consequences and there's no like benefit to doing something quickly, then you just shouldn't have a roll. It's just do they have enough of whatever stat or whatever is needed to succeed eventually? Then they succeed. Do they not? Then they try for a while.
You can just say it takes a while, but you did it.
Yeah.
If there's like, it's generally a hallmark of not good design if there is a type of check that is not pressing. It's something that will almost never be pressing. There's no actual drawback to the failure other than that it didn't happen. And that you can try as many times as you want.
Yeah. So, like, for example, for me, like, with checks to disable locks, if there's no, like, monsters around or time pressure or whatever, then I'll usually just be like, yeah, you eventually get it. If you get Thieves' Tools out, maybe they roll for the first one to, then they at that point they're pretty confident that they didn't miss a trap, and then it's like, yeah, and you can get the rest of the way.
Whereas I never do that because I use the rules that were supposed to be in the book and got removed by accident and never replaced, where critical failure actually makes you go back and lose successes. In Pathfinder 2, that is.
Yeah, well, Pathfinder 2 still does have the thing about like potentially breaking picks.
You could break your picks.
If you can roll low enough to have that reasonably happen, then you can. And
but
the PCs don't have that money.
I use the playtest rule where if you have successes, the critical failure removes the success, and if you don't, then it breaks your picks. Because A, that doesn't break as many picks, and B, that was 100% intended to make it so that just randos off the street won't break into your DC 30 lock every 2 minutes with their like nearly no modifiers. Or sorry, it's 6 minutes. It's a little bit longer than that. So basically the idea being that statistically the random walk towards a success when you're actually losing on a critical failure is very difficult to progress all the way to a success, and you'd literally be out by that lock for like a day.
Standing there during which time you could get caught. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So it was intended completely and was in the playtest getting cut for, I don't even know. Nobody said that they were cutting it. I guess it got cut, but it was intended to make it so that the locks actually did their job in the narrative, and that the basic lock that you could buy would stop a person with like +0 or like basically no lock picking skill from getting into your house for a long time. And then the ones that said they were actually good lock, even like, a first level thief who had +7 would basically be very unlikely to get in without breaking a lot of picks. And that is exactly how the success and failure mechanisms can change the narrative. With as mentioned in chat, that getting removed meant that you can't really keep anybody out for very long, but they might spend a decent amount of money more because they're going to break more picks, since you previously didn't break the picks unless you had no successes to go with you, but you'll definitely get in quickly.
Yeah. So that means that if you actually want to secure something, you're going to want to do the lock and trap combo generally.
Absolutely. And this is the bottom line. You need to look carefully, because that's not even something that was just about the entire success and failure mechanics in Pathfinder 2. It was a specific implementation of what we're calling the consequences of different failure states. In this case, it wasn't that the consequence was removed from the critical failure state. It instead took one of the two possible penalties, removed it, and replaced it with the other penalty all the time, which made the situation both more annoying in the amount of money you might have to spend on it, and worse at actually like doing its job as a lock. So these kinds of situations are rampant in tabletop RPGs, and in a lot of cases, a tabletop RPG with one single unifying mechanic is going to require a lot of interpretation from the players or the GM to make it work. But if you don't recognize sort of what the odds are and the interplay of the consequences for failures versus critical failures, if they exist, maybe the failure is already as critical as it gets, versus the successes, whether they're partial or not, and the critical successes, it becomes harder to like tie those roles into the narrative and keep the game moving.
Yeah. And for that, you want to consider, there's a huge difference between you're rolling a single die, and then that determines the results, or situations where you're rolling multiple dice and then adding up the results. And there's a big difference between that and when you're rolling multiple dice and taking the best or taking the worst. In terms of that, those sorts of situations where you're dealing with multiple dice are going to flatten things out a lot more. You're going to have a lot more situations where, rolling twice and taking the worst is going to skew you in a bad direction. Rolling twice and taking the better is going to skew you in a good direction. And those kind of additive type things are going to skew you more toward the middle, so that the outlier results are going to be a lot less common and feel a lot more like, whoa, that just happened. Whereas you're much more likely to be in toward the center. And then when you define for a given character what is at their center, then that's what's going to be really likely for them to have happen.
Absolutely. And when you're looking at resolution mechanics, it's not always one die, right? We talked about rolling multiple and checking for multiple successes. There are ones, Forged in the Dark, we pointed out, you roll multiple and then you take your best one, other than if you have 0 and you roll 2 and take the worst one. There's others where you roll multiple and take your two best and add them together. There's situations where you just roll 3d6 or 2d6 and add the results together to get a more bell curve distribution.
There's also
with your
situations
modifier.
where dice explode, and so if you roll the highest result, then you throw in another die, or if you roll the lowest result, then like you have some other bad thing that could happen.
And those increase the swinginess of your results by quite a lot compared to if you don't have them. Some resolution mechanics use cards. The interesting thing about a card deck is that if there's not a mechanism for shuffling it midway through, it sort of guarantees that your outcomes will be normalized because the bad cards and the good cards both have to be drawn.
But
however,
if your GM and players are both drawing from the same deck, then
most of those systems don't do that. But if they do, it can be very bad because the GM drawing all the good cards and the players drawing all the bad cards. Unless there are cards that are bad for players are also good for GMs, in which case that kind of can even out. But even if you have your own deck, it still can be the case where you wind up wasting some of the good draws on inconsequential rolls, and then you're going to have a terrible time for when it really matters. You can also have weird situations like that where you've got bad rolls, so you actually attempt... or not rolls, card draws.
bad draws,
You've got cards left, so you actually just attempt to do
a bunch of things with low consequences, so that whenever
you
those
can
fail,
draw
it
them
matter.
and get the deck to shuffle.
Because you then know what's coming next.
You kind of know what's coming next if you can count the cards, or at least vaguely count that you had really good cards used up or really bad cards used up, and you're like, well, I want to hoard because what's left is very good for me.
So generally those kinds of things work better if there's some kind of mechanic that will cause a shuffle somewhere along the line so that you can't predict exactly what's coming next.
Yes. Or you can play with that deck being something that you'll understand and and be like, yeah, you do know. Maybe a shuffle will happen at any given point, but if it doesn't, then I've gotten rid of the bad cards so far, like almost all of them that are in my deck. Everything that's left other than a shuffle trigger is good.
But I mean, you guys did use that on the Pathfinder design team, some of those like 1 through 20 where they like popsicle sticks or something like that to test things out.
We did do that with a potential for a 20 or 1 forcing a reshuffle. And we did that because of the fact that we intended to make sure that each individual character did not get too much of a stint of good luck. To be like, well, it looks like this class is really overpowered because, Logan was rolling all natural 20s today.
Whereas Mark never rolled above a 3. And
so now we think the cleric is bad or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it'd be like, well, so that's why we did that on purpose. But it was a sort of more Gloomhaven-y style. It had the sort of 1 to 20 results, but they were in a deck instead. The way that Gloomhaven does it with like pluses and minuses, and it's got a ×2 and a ×0 for sort of the critical success and critical failure in a deck of 20-ish cards rather than rolling it on dice. Now there are some systems that just have their own bespoke dice that can actually count up more than one possible factor that are then used to adjudicate, like, did you get a success, and did the success also have a special property on that? You also see that situation in, for example, the Cosmere RPG, where you roll again and you might get... you roll not only on your check, but for important checks, you also see if there was like a positive or negative sort of complication that was added on to it. Or in Daggerheart, where you rolled your 2 dice, but if the fear die is higher, you rolled it with fear, and if the hope die is higher, you roll it with hope.
I see a mention here about situations that call for multiple consecutive successes and how much harder it is to succeed multiple times consecutively versus just succeeding in the first place.
Yes, multiply succeeding in a row gets much harder the more that you allow for it. Whereas, one thing that I think people generally know that if you have to succeed 5 times in a row, it's brutally hard. The one that people really don't understand is how pointless it is to allow almost any check where you're just like, there's no negative consequence for trying this. Everyone could try it. Just everybody roll. If you're in most adjudication systems, it has to be like phenomenally difficult, in which case it's super swingy and unfun, or it's just, you might as well just give it to them for free.
Yeah, so this to be clear, is not everyone can try unlimited times that he's talking about. This is
everybody
can try once.
Everybody in your 6-player party tries this once.
And then, like, somebody is probably going to roll high.
Exactly. Like, if you have a check, let's say that everybody in your party can try once, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say you're doing D&D or Pathfinder, right? You need to roll a natural 17. Mm-hmm. A natural 17 to make it. So you made it ridiculously hard. Mm-hmm. You know what?
Somebody's almost certainly going to get a natural 17.
The chance of somebody doing that in your party of 6 players is basically 3/4.
Yeah.
And so it's very swingy, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not even about anything other than just like who rolls a super high in your group.
Yeah. So you would expect that kind of the minimum result is that you would think would be likely would be 17 plus the lowest bonus in your group.
And if you put in a difficulty that is not as crazy, right? Where like the players need to roll, I don't know, like a 13 or a 14 to succeed, then you've got a situation where you get up to 90% and above. And so there's almost no point in doing it. You might as well just say it succeeds, unless there's a drawback for each person who attempted and failed. Yeah.
And I think that's why you see a lot of victory point counting type stuff in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, where it's like, okay, or just general, like, everybody tries, and as long as, half the people succeed, then this happens. So then that's a different way to go about the multiple success type thing. That's not a consecutive multiple success, but a collaborative multiple success.
That's right. And if you want to learn more about those kind of systems, you can go to, for example, our episode of Victory Point Systems or other collaborative checks.
And Matt Guy points about one potential use of that is that kind of check being done for storytelling, role-playing purposes, that it's not about do you succeed or fail, it's about which character succeeds and is then taking point on this next section.
In some of those cases, you can also just have everyone roll and see who rolled the highest to see, all right, whoever rolled the highest, you're the one who notices this first. Eventually, somebody was going to notice it because the heat was slowly ratcheting up in the area, but who noticed it first?
It was the highest you. Perception check, they noticed
it was you, Elfo. Your elf senses were tingling about the heat, and so you noticed that it was happening first. So that is one way to handle it. Honestly, people in tabletop RPGs often adjudicate success and failure methods that are different a little bit from the way that the core systems mechanics work in a variety of situations, like the one we just said about it's inevitable someone notices who noticed it first. That's that's not something that's in Pathfinder or D&D. Could you use it extemporaneously? Easily.
Definitely. And I think talking about folks sometimes thinking the quiet allies feat is bad because they aren't thinking about the eventual failure from someone in the group. So
the people. So to be clear for people who are watching, in Pathfinder 2, there is a feat that says instead of every single person in your party needing to roll stealth, just roll for the lowest person, and if that succeeds, your entire party sneaks past. And some people who look at that feat, they say, this is the worst feat in the game possible. Why would you want to roll just once for the lowest? My thief has much higher modifier than the Clanky Paladin. And the answer is, it's way better if you actually want the whole group to sneak past. If you're just the most selfish thief in the thief reverse, and you're just like, I don't care if everyone else gets caught, they didn't see me, then sure, you don't need that feat.
That means not rolling for the Clanky Paladin means that you don't have to roll for the
cleric,
the rustling cleric, or any of the other people who aren't like ridiculous thief tier legendary stealth. And one of those people, there's a good chance one of those people is going to do worse than the Clanky Paladin a lot of the time, and then be the thing that triggers the failure. And that reduces that That removes that possibility. And also...
Well, especially since Quiet Allies only works well in following the expert.
Yes.
Which means that the Clunky Paladin at least is... No matter how much they're trying to be bad at stealth, they have to be able to add their level because they're following the expert.
Yes.
So the difference between that Paladin and the second to worst person is not going to be huge. And that means that it's very unlikely, unless the entire rest of the party is like master at stealth, except the paladin or something like that.
And then in that case, you may want to go with this.
In that case, maybe the paladin should learn to get with the program.
Yeah, or maybe you're like, okay, you know what, we're gonna use like magic or something on the paladin to help with this, and then we can still do this system where we don't have to roll for anyone else because we still needed to roll for the paladin anyway.
And to be fair, if the paladin gets with the program, or is like, we'll buy the paladin stealth items, or we're doing something, and they get close again to the party that's all good at stealth, then Quiet Allies is even better.
Yes, because
now you're rolling a pretty good check for everybody.
Exactly.
So, like, it is just, when you're doing multiple checks for something in the party, the way that changes the odds is not, in general, what most people expect, because probability doesn't work the way that many of us expect.
Because when a lot of people are rolling, somebody is probably going to do really well, and somebody is probably going to do really poorly. And if you care about only the best result or only the worst result, then you're going to get some pretty big swings. So things that can help mitigate that are helpful.
Right. It's the same as when you're talking about rolling multiple times and taking the best or the worst result. You're going to eventually expect to get a pretty good or a pretty bad result, even if you only get to roll twice, let alone more than twice. It's really fundamentally the same thing, although it can feel different to people because it's not their character who's rolling for the other checks. I think GMs in general, like, who have to roll for a lot of their different characters all at once, kind of get it a little more easily than people who are usually players. But even then, it's sometimes hard to internalize the way that the probability changes the story. Yeah. And you just think, no, it shouldn't be that hard to succeed. I mean, we each individually have a 75% chance in the party. We got rid of the paladin. We replaced them with another rogue.
And the chance that at least one of them is going to fail is pretty high.
The chance that at least one of them is going to fail is pretty high.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can also have the situation, I mean, it's not, the distribution is not the same, but I tend to, kind of as a shorthand for thinking about things, think about roll twice, take the higher as similar to getting on a d20 is similar to getting a +4 bonus when you're considering, like, how powerful it is.
Yeah, it is. It varies based on
the other. It definitely varies based on other things.
It varies based on the details of the system.
Yeah.
Because if you have a success by 10 or more and failure by 10 or more, then it's actually drastically different, and it stabilizes it, actually.
Yeah.
Whereas in a system like D&D 5e where you don't have that, it's only worth around 4 to 5 at max, at the exact maximum. Yeah. And there are several places on the board where it's only worth as much as like a +1. Yeah. And it depends on what your actual chances were. Now, the plus and minus 10 of Pathfinder 2 actually stabilizes it as more similar to a 4, like, for a larger range of the d20 because of the fact that, not because of the fact that the rolling twice isn't good, but because of the fact that 4 becomes more useful in certain situations, and because of the fact that when you're at edge cases for a regular success, you're still working towards getting a critical success with the pluses, whereas in D&D, it might be the case that even a +1 would get rid of almost all of your remaining failures because there just aren't any failures left.
Absolutely. Well, it's definitely an oversimplification, but it is something to consider for folks who may be thinking, well, you know, oh, rolling twice isn't that good. Like that, but I think that folks might generally have an easier time rocking that, like, +4 bonus is really powerful.
Yeah, it's a lot of things about numbers. And one of the things that is the most dangerous to tabletop RPG design is people's feeling of the fact that the number 1 is a small number. And this causes serious chaos and problems for many tabletop RPGs. And here's why. So, okay, your tabletop RPG you're designing there's no way people are going to be okay with you adding a plus 1.5 to their d20 roll or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to add an integer. Not only that, people can get really uppity about 1 and be like, it's only 1. That's not enough. Even if 1 is just like dramatically, ridiculously powerful in your system, because maybe you're rolling only a d10, so the 1 shifts you by 10%.
Mm-hmm.
And in many RPGs, like something that would be like your dodge check increases by 10% cumulatively with your dodge checks, not multiplicatively. It'd be like, this is one of the craziest abilities that was available. I will spend talent points on this. If it was like a video game, for example. But a plus 1 just inherently triggers something in people's brains and be like, this is terrible. So the game designer pulls out their hair saying, what else? Well, what can I do next? The problem is, because you can't do 1.5 or 1.25, the next thing you could do is a 2, which is twice as much as a 1. So if 1 was right, or you were like, well, I've looked into this, and maybe 1 is a little bit low, and people don't like it. But 2 is double as much, so 2 is probably way too much. And there's nothing in between.
Yeah, there's a game that Mark made that he runs for me sometimes where the damage mechanics based on rank are like entirely like these gigantic expressions of like ridiculous fractions.
Every time you heighten the spell, it multiplies the damage by
What's the fraction?
I think that what it does is it raises it to the 1.5 power.
Oh, yeah. Was it?
I think it
raises to the 1.5
power over the damage of the previous rank.
Yes.
Which definitely gives you fractions.
Yes.
And you have a base spell power for your minimum rank, and then it just basically keeps raising it to the 1.5 each time.
Oh right, yeah. So the numbers that we have are just like these like giant things that we then truncate, and are like, all right, now that we get up this rank, and then it'll be like, well, but it's a day in which like light magic is more in phase, and therefore it counts as 1 rank higher, and then this kind of thing happens, and it's just like...
But the mana costs double at each rank, but the effect only multiplies by 1.5, but that makes up for the fact that the action economy of casting 1 high rank fireball is way better than the action economy of casting tons of minimum rank fireballs.
Yeah, for sure. So you just have all these like giant expressions, and we've definitely talked about this and been like, you could never publish this kind of thing. But it's satisfying to the math brain.
Yep. Absolutely. And so these are the ways that these mechanics sort of shape your game. They make a big difference in the feel of the game, even if it's a subconscious or unconscious feel. And as people were saying in chat, you can wind up just terrifying the players to get out of bed, even if your game system is not supposed to be doing that based on the way the mechanics work. Or on the other hand, you could have players who are just blasé, smugly just attacking the characters in the setting who are supposed to be powerful, or trying to break into things they should never try to break into just because the mechanics of the system allow for that.
I was just checking in chat. You could only crit if your total is an irrational number. Maybe crits are prime. Yes.
There you go. So basically, you need to pay attention to these mechanics. What are they incentivizing? What are the odds saying about the world in your game and how likely things are to succeed, and how heroic does that make these characters, even in their weaknesses and in their strengths?
What are the consequences of your sort of partial success states, or PCs,
or your failures,
or your failure states? Are your PCs getting like taking serious wounds that they're going to be carrying with them throughout the adventure a lot of the time, and then having to carefully manage their resources because of the success and failure system? How hard does your system make it for your character to get killed? Can your character die as a result of a single roll or like a single aspect of the resolution system? Or, is it a system where where even no matter how hard your character fails, they can't die unless they'll always escape unless like the players decide that their character dies?
Absolutely. So that whole thing about death and raising the stakes on death is a pretty separate topic that I think we may have even
we've talked about that, but I still think it's relevant in terms of like if the system when you're talking about like what are the consequences of failure.
it is a potential one of the examples of a worst case consequence that's not even always the worst case that often comes up and is important to people because it's just an iconic. It's an iconic negative.
Yeah,
having your character removed from the game for whatever reason, whether it's death or that the character just gets too stressed out in Blades in the Dark, or in Fabula Ultima, if your character is removed because of the consequence of what you did.
Well, you know the old joke that the only thing players hate more than character death is treasure loss.
Oh, well, treasure loss, that's a whole different story, Linda. That's my treasure. So, take this knowledge. This is a Design Diaries episode, so it's for people who want to be game designers or who want to homebrew and modify a game that somebody else designed. Take this knowledge and use it for your own homebrew, for your own rulings and adjudications, to think about what that house rule or homebrew or new game is telling players. So when you're about to say, yeah, all natural ones are you trip over your shoelaces, think twice about what that means in terms of the character's competency in the fiction and how it might make them look like a fumbling buffoon.
Yeah. And you can think about also, you know, using success systems as a way to push the narrative in a particular direction. You know, maybe the players are... Maybe you have something like that that's temporarily introduced because the characters have slipped through into another dimension where the laws of reality don't quite make sense. And so then that's something that's temporarily there. Or maybe you are running a system that's more often used for a more heroic fantasy, but you would like to run a game that's more gritty in it. And so you decide to take a look at ways you can shift this, or vice versa. So you decide to take a look at a way so you can shift the success system to help support the change that you want to do in the narrative in the field.
So it's not just because the mechanic seems interesting or like it seems cool mathematically, but because it has the feel and the tone that you hope for in your game. And that's the bottom line. That's the TLDR to take home from this. And if the only thing it does is convince you to maybe think twice about using critical fumble additional effects for a check you make a lot of the time, like attack rolls in your game, I think that this episode will have succeeded. So, I hope you enjoyed our Crit Fumble or Succeed, How Tabletop RPG Success Systems Shape the Universe. Please like and subscribe, or even join us if you'd like to give us some support. And let's vote for next Tuesday's episode.
Next Saturday we are going to be playing. We're going to be playing Dawnsbury Days to show off a new magic system that Mark has written for Magic Plus. That very little has been said about, and we will be revealing some secrets there for you all.
That is true. I did not put that on the specifically on this vote because of the fact that we haven't done it yet regardless, so we can just vote for it again. So the choices are Build Night and Workshop, Ask Arcane Mark, Say by Game Q&A, Adjusting for Circumstances, Arcane Mark Plays, Eldamon Elements.
Oh, people want Eldamon Elements.
Sweeping.
There we go.
We're going to do an Eldamon element. All right. Get some support for Eldamon. That should help after this whole diamond fiasco. Yeah. If people haven't seen it on the Roll for Combat channel, it's a fiasco.
That it is. It's like bankruptcy law is just a nightmare.
Yes. It's not Roll for Combat going bankrupt. It is the distributor Diamond, which will be much worse for comic book companies than it is for Roll for Combat. Hopefully, it's not as horrific for Paizo as it might be, because they've got to have millions of dollars of inventory that was with Diamond. All right. Well, take care, everyone. I hope you have a good week. And, Diamond bankruptcy, you can see it on Roll for Combat, Rohit. Diamond, the distributor, went bankrupt a while ago, but now they're doing something pretty, that seems, to me, pretty, like, how can they possibly get away with this? Where they're just selling the stuff that other people own that was consigned with them and taking all of the proceeds, possibly undercutting the people who have this by selling it for lower to then compete with the other books that are out there on the market. So It's weird. In bankruptcy law, only makes sense if you realize that the people who benefit from bankruptcy law is the bank. Yep. AKA bankruptcy. And they're the ones who got it put into place the way that it was.
But you can check out Steven on today's Roll for Combat.
And we'll have a longer version of it to tomorrow's Roll for Combat Live, but the 13-minute TLDR, which is, that's pretty TLDR for Steven.
That is really TLDR for Steven.